Hello, everybody, and welcome. Now, it's an interesting day, and it's a little bit of a new thing, but that's okay. Don't freak out. Still the same me, still the same concept, but we're gonna do something a little bit different tonight. So I hope everybody is doing okay and ready to move off in an adventure that's a little bit different, roughly. But welcome in, Matt. Good to see you, Kilter Preacher. Welcome in, and thank you so much for the 45 months of being Spartacus. Um, that is amazing and much appreciated. Tuna is here. Welcome in, Tuna. Hope everybody is having a good one and making it okay. Yeah, different. Panic. Panic, right. No need to panic. Same basic format, same concept, learning, trying to understand the world, but a little bit of a different angle. And that is that for this particular series, which is a new series, and I've even considered maybe making a different setup here on Twitch with different layout and such. We are going to tackle a new topic for this particular series, and we are going to specifically be looking at the history of government and politics, which I know is just everybody's favorite thing in the world to talk about. And I'm sure that after the crazy year of elections that was 2024, we are all super excited to talk yet more about politics. Uh, but this actually grew out of that feeling and that moment that was 2024, politically speaking. And I got a lot of questions. Uh, I had probably more people emailing and asking and questioning about stuff, specifically pertaining to government and politics last year than I probably ever have before. Now, some of that could be because I've got a wider audience than I've ever had before, but it also could be that this was a presidential election year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of different potential reasons, but I felt like there was a real interest or perhaps a real need to talk a little bit more about the government, right? Or the government. What's up, Linteku? Good to see you. Um, how do we organize ourselves? Where does all of this stuff come from? How do we organize not just ourselves, but our minds and our power? And what do we even mean when we say these words like power and organization and all this stuff? So, we're going to do a series. And I don't think that we'll be doing this necessarily every single week. I think we might mix it up. I already have the next history stream planned, so we might do that next week, and we might alternate in and out. We need to kind of get back a little bit more on a regular schedule now that it's back at the top of the year. We need to do something for our 100th viewer request. The next viewer request stream will be purely number 100. So, DCI Banks, we're not talking about American politics. We're talking about government and politics at large. At large. We're talking about the concepts and the sociological. I promise. I promise. We will have streams at the end of this series that are specifically about United States politics and government structure. But tonight we will not even be talking about politics and government in a country at all, because we're going to be talking about how politics and government works when we don't even have countries. We're going to be looking at prehistoric government and politics tonight. I promise I would not bait and switch that on you. Also, hey, a DCI base, good to see you. So this is the topic, and the interest is there, I think, and my excitement is there for sure. So hopefully we will be able to get into this. The streams are going to work basically the same way. I will probably not be showing as many pictures for some of these because we're going to be talking about ideas in large scale, and it's hard to show, especially pictures from prehistory that talk about government, because there really aren't any pictures of talking about government and stuff like that. So we will use them when appropriate. These are also probably not going to be as long as a normal stream. I will be moving these to YouTube as they happen, and I have discovered that YouTube viewers don't like 2 hour long streams. Not that I'm making my streams for YouTube. I'm making my streams for the viewers that I have here on Twitch, but I hope that by focusing on one or two topics per discussion, we might be able to get a little bit more people involved. But I can tell just by watching the numbers here that people aren't really interested in hearing me run my mouth. So let's talk a little bit about this whole concept in the first place. And where we start is a discussion about this word. This word is power. Now, we could get really, really philosophical here. There are a lot of sociological, anthropological, philosophical debates about what we mean when we say power. For the purpose of our discussion here in politics and in government, what we're looking at is our ability as a human, or our capacity to affect other things or to impose our will on things. So we all have a certain amount of power inherent in our person, right? I have a large amount of power, right? I can pick my phone up. That involves muscle power. I can talk to you on stream and explain things to you. This is intellectual power. I have a limited amount of money. That's economic power. We have resources that we can bring towards affecting circumstances. This is resource power or capital power. So we have all of these things that we can do, but the question here is, how do we use it, right? So we have social power, we have emotional power, we have intellectual power, we have physical power, we have economic power. But what do we do with it? This is actually a lot deeper question than a lot of people really want to look at, because by recognizing that we have power, what this also means is that we have a certain amount of ability to affect things, even if we don't want to admit that we can affect things, even if we don't want to necessarily admit that we have the capacity to impose our will on things. We don't always like to admit that, because that brings with it a certain amount of responsibility and the question, of course, of morality. If we have this concept of power, how do we use it in the right way? Or what even is the right way? Now, again, we could chase way off into the philosophy weeds with this, and we could totally do that if people wanted to, but the important angle that we're going to try to look at for this entire series is, how do we use this when we are in groups? Now, this is something that is unfortunately becoming a much more common argument, where government shouldn't exist because I should be free to use my power however I want to, right? This is the potential argument that some people that might qualify themselves as anarchists might say, or maybe people that are particular versions of libertarian. They say that the government basically should not exist, or if it does exist, it should have very, very little power in itself held in the institution of the government, and that as an individual, I should be sovereign in my power. What's up, Sock Now? Yeah, how can we be just and use that power? Exactly. This is a great question. How can we make sure that we are using the ability that we have to affect things and the capacity that we have to impose our will? How are we using this wisely? And how do we make sure that we are doing the right thing in this circumstance? Now, if you are living in a world completely by yourself, you still have power, right? So if you take the stereotypical, or what might be the favored concept of, you're living on a deserted island completely by yourself. How do you use your power? Well, in that circumstance, you're going to have a lot more freedom to decide, right? Because ultimately your decisions and your use of power are only going to affect yourself. And and I know that this is a tough thing to do, if we consider the island itself your resources, you have the resources that are available to you. Now, I know that this brings in entirely different concepts of what counts as just use of environment, and I know that that concept brings us to how are we destroying the earth, etc. We can absolutely talk about that, but for the particulars of our discussion here, let's just assume that we're not going to be getting too deep into the environmental needs. If you're living on the island by yourself, you get to dispose of these resources however you see fit, and you have the power to do whatever you can within your capacity, right? Plump Tardigrade, excellent. That's that's a great name. Welcome in, and I hope that you never get ejected into space to see whether or not you would survive. But as a tardigrade, we know that you would for at least a little while. Welcome in. Right, what's up, Silver? Good to see you. On Twitch, you have the power to post emotes. This is absolutely true. And the suspicious goose here is a great one to use when we're talking about politics and government, because we have to ask ourselves, are we doing this the right way? So, the vast majority of humans in human history have not lived on deserted islands by themselves. They have lived in groups, right? You minored in history and sociology, so this is great. Excellent, Tardigrade. I have a master's in history and another master's in sociology, so we are here. And I also teach anthropology, so this is all kind of in our world. And please feel free to ask questions or participate in the discussion however you feel fit. This is a very open and, I think, loving community, and I've been very lucky to have so many people participate on really, really good, honest, what we might call good faith levels, right? Chat is government confirmed. When we participate in chat, we have a certain level of governmental politics at play here, because now when we bring other people into the mix, we all as individuals have power. But the question here is, do we have unlimited and unrestrained capacity to use that power? And the answer to that capacity is yes, you still have the capacity to do that. But now we ask a question, and this is a little bit more of a question here, is when we get into a group, should we use that capacity? And that's a different question, right? So much power dynamics at play at each chat on Twitch is wild. Absolutely, 100%. What's up, Junk Collector? Good to see you. Pretty sure chat is controlled by a dictator. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's me, right? I get to decide what works in chat. But as a group, we also have a certain level of community appreciation for what happens in chat. And I've even seen this happen where members of our chat will take up for each other if there's a troll or something like that pops in, right? So we can see the politics working already, because then we have to recognize that with more people, we also can potentially have mismatches or differentiation in power levels, right? And I'm not talking about Dragon Ball Z power levels where, your power level's over 9,000. What we're talking about here is the fact that each individual human being does not have the exact same literal amount of power in every single scenario, right? Now, let me be very, very clear here. We're not talking about liberties and freedoms. We're talking about power, right? I believe that freedom should be equal. That's obvious. We're not trying to get into some sort of straw man rabbit hole here where McInnes said, obviously, some people don't have the same rights as others. That's not what I'm talking about, right? What we're talking about here is we don't all have the same amount of power. Some people might have more money than other people. Some people might have more intellectual capacity than other people. Some people might have more physical capacity than other people. Some people might have more social or emotional capacity than other people. And when we have a group, these differences are going to become much more evident. We're going to have some situations where some people might have more capacity in this area, others might have more capacity in that area. And with the differentiation of power, we also get that fancy word, inequality. Now, there's a big issue when we come to this. And of course, this is going to be something that we have to answer. So let me catch up with chat here. You live in Puerto Rico, and we live in groups like we don't live by ourselves. Exactly, right? Fall Machine, welcome in. Noger, TOS says no, that we don't have unlimited power in chat. This is true because even though I have immediate power, Twitch ultimately has power over their own platform, right? Synthfan streams, welcome in. Equal under the law, but differing in resources. Exactly. That's a great point. And I hope that you have a good time in. Welcome in. Your power level is under 9,000. Mine too. The linkage between capacity and power is not often discussed. And that's exactly correct. That's why I want to talk about this stuff as the basis of this entire stream of, or series of streams here. Because that's ultimately what we're doing. If we're talking about politics and government, we're talking about whether or not we follow the full capacity of our power or whether we limit our capacity on power. And if we do limit our capacity to use all of our power, how and why and in what circumstances? This is the tough question, right? This is the super tough question. The idea here is we have to try to figure this out. And if we're doing this in a group, we have to figure out who actually who gets to decide, right? Who gets to decide what limits on power? Who gets to decide what capacity to which we exercise our power? But this is the basis of the concept of government and politics, right? We get to decide these things. Now, if we have differences of power levels, this is going to create inequalities. Now, what's interesting is that inequalities by themselves are evident, right? In any human circumstance, if you have more than one person involved, there are going to be some levels of inequalities, right? Even with identical twins, there are going to be some levels of inequality, one way or the other, that are going to keep them from being completely 100% the same when it comes to power and capacity, right? So inequalities are not inherently evil. The exploitation of inequalities or the use of inequalities against other people, this is where things get really interesting and where we have to once again look at how do we do this, right? We say some people have this capacity, other people don't. Not all of these are important, right? Not everybody can speak 4 different languages. So we have intellectual linguistic inequalities, but there's no punishment for that, right? Because that inequality is not one we have decided is particularly important. But there are inequalities where we do think things are particularly important. For example, this person has a different capacity to follow our mutually selected rules. Now, that is an interesting question. How do we treat this person? That person has shown either a disinterest or a lack of capacity to follow the norm. Now we have politics and government involved because we've decided that this is an important area and we have to decide how we're going to treat this certain circumstance. Is there a punishment? Is there not a punishment? If there is a punishment, who gets to decide what kind of punishment? How did we decide whether this is worth punishment or not worth punishment? All of these are questions of government, right? And all of these are questions of politics. So when we use power, we can use power in conjunction with other people's power, or we can use this power as an antagonistic force where your power is matched against mine. And when we come to this point, we have to make a couple of fairly obvious recognitions. And while it seems like these are going to be kind of no brainer kind of things, it's really kind of worth saying this stuff out loud, right? One of these is my power affects other people and vice versa. If I'm living in a group, my power affects other people and their power affects me. Now, if we're working together, their power could augment my power. Their power could complement my power. Our power together can make Captain Planet, right? It's a bit of an old 90s joke. But their power could also be antagonistic towards me. Their power could be working against my power, or their capacity could be working against my capacity. And if there are inequalities, obviously here, there's the rub, right? Physical capacities as in disabilities, and how are those treated with power? Exactly, right? So if we recognize inequalities, how do we decide what the base level should be? How do we decide whether or not we need to use our collective power to affect these individuals in a positive way, not just a negative way, right? We're going to take pollution down to zero, Jiminy Snicket. Exactly. Power can remove freedoms. This is 100% true as well. But we have to recognize that my power, if we're living in a society, affects other people, right? We can't move past this without thinking about it. Way too many times, we don't think about something as basic as how our decisions affect other people. To, quote George Costanza's father, we live in a society, right? We can't just necessarily go running around making willy-nilly ideas and expressions of power and use our capacity in whatever way we want and not expect that to affect other people. We like sometimes to pretend that our actions and our use of power doesn't affect other people because in many cases that's easier to do. We also don't like to admit sometimes that our power can affect people in a positive way, not just a negative way. There are ways we could make situations better for other people. And this could be, exactly, not just a big thing, just a small thing. If I'm in a mixed group and I notice that someone is being picked on for being socially unequal, I can speak up for that person. But in that moment, I'm using my capacity as an individual with social power to exert some level of influence over this situation. I can, in a limited way, depending on how much influence I have, I can impact that circumstance, right? This is something that we need to realize. And I know that this, again, is very basic. It's very obvious. But the reality here is something that we don't think about as much as we need to. Here's another one of these. This is kind of a follow-up to that. We should always be asking ourselves, if we recognize that our power can affect other people and is going to affect other people if we're living in a group, how much should my power affect others? And how much should their power affect me? Now, the should is a tough question, right? When we throw that word should in there, it really mixes up the scenario quite a bit. How much should my power as an individual affect other people in my society? And how much should the power of other people affect me in society? And this is a tough question. But this question is the one that politics and government tries to answer. Now, I know we could say that, politics is about electing a person to this position, or it's about writing laws that enshrine freedoms, or it's about punishing people that break the law, or it's about, making trade treaties with other countries. Sure, but all of that boils down to, as a collective unit, how should our power as a country or as a state or as a county or as a city, how should our power be used to affect other people? And this is all what it comes down to, right? The ideas are basic and they're pretty straightforward, but we ignore this a lot. We really, really do. We really, really do. I think if we take a look at how others affect the individual, that's an amazing litmus test for sure. Exactly. If we are going to, if we're going to have a government body, or if we're going to have some sort of governmental or political apparatus, what powers do we cede to that entity? Right? If we are going to create a government entity, we're going to give that entity the justification to use power. Right? We're going to give it the authority to exercise our power on behalf of us. So in that way, our governments are supposed to be extensions of our power, right? If we cede that power to the government, then the government should exercise that power back towards us. How much do we want the government affecting us? And if we give the government the power to affect us, we have to also realize that our power then is affecting other people, because we have inequalities. We don't just have, again, physical inequalities. We also have emotional inequalities, or social inequalities, or economic inequalities, or resource inequalities. So just because it affects me in this way, does it affect everybody this way? And should it affect everybody this way? Should it affect me in this way? These are tough, tough questions, but they come from really basic concepts. So if we boil it down even one step further and get to kind of like the meta question of government and politics, that deep question is, should there be limits on my power? And we could debate this philosophically for probably ever, right? Should there be limits on my power? I will tell you that I think the answer here pretty obviously is yes. Now, not everybody agrees with me when I say that. There are some people that say things like, no, there should not be limits on my power. I should be able to do whatever I want to whenever I want to. Okay, maybe so. I don't think that's a really good idea, though, because if we look at circumstances, historically speaking, where people have had the power to do whatever they want to, and if we look at circumstances in modern times where people have the power to do whatever they want to, do we see them doing universally good things? Do we see them changing the world for positives all the time? And if we could have a historical record of people that have limits removed from their power universally 100% of the time doing positive and good things and using that power to positively affect other people around them, sure, let them do their thing. But here's the question. How much bad do we allow? If we had, 100 people and we said, okay, you 100 people can do whatever you want, and 99 of them went around changing the world for positive, but one of them turned into a mass murderer and killed, thousands of people, is that a good deal? Is that still a good exchange? I don't think that there should be unlimited power. I think that Emperor Palpatine was wrong, right? As an educator, I have seen massive shifts in the past 15 years, moving from concern for the whole, like an entire class, to a focus on the individual. Yes. And while sometimes that is necessary, as the constant norm has brought about a lot of negative, and while sometimes that is necessary, as the constant norm has brought about a lot of negative. Yeah, so and tardigrade, I teach college for a living as well, so welcome, fellow educator. There has been a shift in a lot of people's ideology towards more individualistic approach to situations. And the question about how does my power affect other people has not been as interesting or as captivating to many people as how should that power benefit me? And in certain cases, that's absolutely something that needs to be asked. And I don't think that it should ever be completely jettisoned from the conversation about government and politics. But the thing here, again, is how much does that impact me? How much does that impact us? How much does that approach benefit society as a whole? Do we recognize that your power has an effect on other people and that other people's power has an effect on you? And I think that one of the things that's really lacking in that conversation is an awareness. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this stuff, because if we're not aware of all of this discussion, we can't necessarily make the best, most well-informed decision about things like voting or whatever. We can't even necessarily make the best discussions or decisions, rather, about how we conduct ourselves amongst our friends groups, right? If I'm unaware that my position and my power affects my friends, am I being the best friend that I can be in that friend situation? We're not even necessarily talking here about purely, enshrined governmental structures with bureaucracy, etc., right? I think it's just we don't understand the basis of how our power affects other people. And I think if we did, there would be a lot less trolling on the internet. There would be a lot less name calling and harassment and bullying on the internet, because people don't think that others have an effect on them if they're hiding behind the keyboard, right? Right. I think we should make the conditions for that freedom of power, but we have to first generate the conditions that teach reasonability. See, yeah, what you're saying is it would be easier to have unlimited power if everybody was educated in the way to use it the right way. Even then, I don't think we should have it, because I think you could train somebody to do something the best way possible, and they're still going to mess it up. I'm not necessarily overtly pessimistic about human nature, but I do think we have to be realistic and say that even the best intentioned people still screw stuff up and affect other people negatively, right? The old adage that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? I don't think that the concept of, overly free, really smart people is necessarily going to be any different in end result than overly free, uneducated people. Because, while education plays into stuff on a sociological level, like crime, types of crimes, violent crimes, etc., I don't think that it's necessarily going to completely eliminate that. I think that we just should not have unlimited power. Should there be limits on my power? I think yes. And I feel like a lot of other people would agree with me on that. If you don't, that's okay. I disagree with you. If you have a well-reasoned philosophical discussion that you can present as an argument for your side, I would be happy to listen to it. I doubt that it's going to convince me. But if you're just one of those people that's like, heck no, government sucks, you're probably not going to be the person that I'm going to agree to disagree with. I don't think that's the way to go. So if we answer the question, should there be limits on my power, and we say yes, well then, how do we decide? If there are going to be limits on the power, how do we decide? Who gets to use the power? How do we get to use the power? When do we decide this situation gets power, that situation doesn't get power? How do we decide when to allow these things, when to not allow these things? And the answer to that question is government and politics, right? This is where it really comes in. So we have recognized this as a human species all the way back in time. Now, when we discuss the oldest prehistoric concept of government, we're going to have to make a couple of things very, very clear. Number one, a lot of this is speculation based, because if we're talking prehistoric, we don't have written records. And we have to try our best Tardigrade. Tardigrade, thank you so much for the follow and welcome to the adventure. If we're going to look at what prehistoric government and politics looked like, we don't obviously have records from that. We have archaeological evidence from that, but archaeological evidence from prehistoric time periods is pretty scant, right? Oh yeah, I'm a giant Indiana Jones fan. I grew up wanting to be Indiana Jones, so I thought he was just the coolest person ever, and I realized that archaeology is not nearly as glamorous as Indiana Jones. It's just a lot of standing in the dirt and shaking a sifter, right? Or taking meticulous pictures of like pieces of pottery over and over and over again. Not very much adventure. Literally no Nazi punching, right? No Nazi punching. So I was led to a false sense of archaeological glamour by Indiana Jones, but I still love history and archaeology is fun. So just not as cool as I thought it was going to be. No bull whips, no fancy super powerful artifacts that melt people's faces, but whatever it is. Anyway, government and prehistory, it's there. We know it's there. We know it has to be there because it's the only way we would have survived, right? If we're just being honest, human beings would never have made it through hunter-gatherer stage without some level of cooperation, right? If we didn't have groups, we would not have made it. If we didn't even have the basic concept of family groups, we probably wouldn't have made it. The fact that baby humans are so underdeveloped compared to other baby mammals is an evidence or piece of evidence that we're living as communal groups where we're taking care of each other, because obviously you have a baby and that baby can't take care of itself, so we have to take care of it. But with limited resources, this means we have to decide things like who gets the food, right? Obviously, here we have some level of politics and some level of government. That's unfortunate. Nazi punching is fun. I've never punched a Nazi before, so I would not know. Lumpy, welcome in. I don't think I said hello. Lumpy, good to see you. You once watched a YouTube short where the joke was the cleanup crew from Indiana Jones talking about all the stuff they have to fix after he's done. Right? Same sort of thing where you could probably make a movie about the people that are the architects and construction workers that have to fix all the buildings after the Avengers have a fight. Right? Government is consensus. We'll talk about that in just a bit. And we definitely need consensus. I think that consensus is lost these days, and that compromises, then we lose freedoms because of this. Well, consensus very frequently involves compromise. And even if we're looking at consensus, that's usually based on some level of inequality, because a consensus doesn't necessarily mean that everybody completely agrees on everything. It just means that we agree enough to make this thing the thing, right? I always refer, when I'm teaching this in my class, I usually refer to this as, if I'm asking you, right? If I say, hey, I'm going to give you money and you get to go buy your pizza, what kind of pizza are you going to get? And everybody has their favorite kind of pizza. And I say, okay, cool. If I'm going to give you money to buy pizza for you and your best friend, are you going to buy the same pizza? And they're like, sometimes yes, but a lot of times there we get, well, not exactly the same, but we're going to still be pretty happy. And I'm like, okay. Now, what if I give you money and you have to go buy pizza for 30 people in the classroom? What kind of pizzas are you going to get? And usually what I get is, we're going to get like half cheese and half pepperoni. And I'm like, but that's not what you wanted, right? And they're like, yeah, but everybody eats cheese and pepperoni pizza, right? And that's better than no pizza. Okay, so what we've just reached is a consensus, but you had to give up your preference for that, right? So in that scenario, preferences here could be freedoms of use of power, right? So even though we found a consensus that everybody agrees on, it's not necessarily what I wanted. And as a society member, I have to ask myself, is that a legitimate limit on my power? There's a question, right? You wish you were born with tusks or something. Oh my goodness. Have it on good authority that all ancient people lived in the perfect, sustainable anarcho socialist communes without violence and at harmony with nature. Ah, interesting. Um, it sounds like you've been reading 1700s and 1800s political and economic theory. And yeah, that's wrong. We know from history and archaeology uh, that it wasn't that way. People always be killing people, and people always be wrecking the environment, right? We are, even historically, even if we go back to 150,000-year-old humankind wandering around in the forests of Africa, we're still wrecking the environment. We're still directly leading to extinction. We are still directly leading into changes in genetic alleles, right? Um, so there's the rub, right? So the point, we have to speculate about some of this. So how do we know anything about this? Well, we can look at how existing groups lived in two periods of history, right? So if we're looking at what we might call original structures of government, we can see these show up in other sources, right? We can hear ancient people talk about these other groups. And in certain circumstances, we can even look at modern people and how they live, though there are very, very few uncontacted people groups left. And the big sort of explosion of uncontacted people groups actually led to the origins of anthropology as a science. Now, this is what's happening in like the 1800s and early 1900s, and there are some pretty obvious biases. For example, most of the early anthropology that we have is very Eurocentric. It's incredibly pro-Christian, and it's incredibly pro-white. So racist, religious, contexted, Eurocentric. And what that means is if we read these anthropological accounts, these ethnographic accounts of uncontacted people groups, they're going to be very frequently misunderstood, they're going to be misinterpreted, and they're going to have loads and loads of bias in them, right? This is problematic in a lot of different ways. And what that means is, unfortunately, because our European forefathers wrecked most of the colonial world that they touched, this is going to be very sad because a lot of these people groups don't exist anymore. Or the way that they exist now is so totally different than the way that they existed previously that we can't necessarily look at them as one-to-one comparisons with original old people groups, right? We started changing our environments going back to the development of controlled fire. Exactly, Maddie. Welcome in. Good to see you. Calling it being misunderstood is very generous. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's literally, in some cases, just written as slam pieces against these people. It's purposefully misidentifying them in many cases, right? It's pretty rough and very, very obviously bad. Claire, thank you so much for being Spartacus. Welcome in. Hope you're having a good one. Colonizers have biases? Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? Anyway, so our access to primitive people groups is going to be limited. It's going to be based on views that are traditionally outside of those people groups looking in. And in many cases, it's going to be just chock full of so many biases that we have to question even the interpretation of the material at all, right? It's designed to reinforce scientific racism and colonial power structures. Exactly, right? Exactly. I think I said that right before you popped in, but it's good to hear you say that back. Maddie, by the way, has a background in anthropology and could do just as well at this conversation as I could. So I'm glad to see you, Maddie. Appreciate your participation. I always feel good when I get other people saying the same things, because that makes me seem a little bit less like a talking head on the internet, right? Corgi bits, absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire, for the corgi bits. They are adorable. Anyway, so as only a second generation American, it always amazes me what wasn't taught in the schools in the 80s and 90s, and the curriculum sadly hasn't changed. You got in trouble a couple of years ago for fighting my district on the curriculum. Tardigrade, I completely understand that. I went to public school in the 80s and the 90s, and it took me until the very late 90s and early 2000s to recognize the biases inherent in the system and to begin learning on my own and to ask questions. And what that led me into was conflicts with my parents, conflicts with my teachers at school, conflicts with my professors at college. Not like knockdown, drag out things. Just, here's what I'm being told, and here's how that doesn't line up with reality. And people that are in positions of power don't like hearing that their positions don't line up with reality, right? Is it really much less biased now, though? Natty, what's up? Good to see you. In some ways, yes. In other ways, it's worse. And I know that's not what we want to hear. But curriculums in some states have gone what I would say is actively backwards and purposefully backwards. It's a hard subject to broach, and a lot of people even now are more happy to get defensive about it. Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the reason why I particularly don't care for the ivory tower academia. This is one of the reasons why I still try to take my time to talk on the internet for free, right? To try to get information out to help people, right? Very much so, but you also it was bad in many ways, and it's better in some ways, but I think it's actually worse in others, like Mississippi, sure. Rod Durden, what's up? Respect your authority. Exactly. Respect my authority. You're in South Carolina, and it's actively regressed, even with teachers and admin fighting. Tardigrade, it has regressed in my state as well. I know that South Carolina is especially what we might call Southern, and especially conservative. So I feel the hurt. I'm in Mississippi. So, yeah. I hear you. Okay. So if we're looking at how the original people organized themselves, what are we organizing ourselves into? We are organizing ourselves into egalitarian bands. Now, these sound like the things that the Guardians of the Galaxy have to go find on a distant planet. Like, we need to find the egalitarian bands. They're the only thing that can stop Thanos, right? But what actually is a band? And what makes it egalitarian? So this is the oldest known organization of human history, and these are very, very small groups, usually like a couple of dozen, right? Probably not likely many more than about 30 people. There are not a lot of people in a band, and there are reasons for this small size. So we have a small group of people, right? That's a band, 30-ish, probably smaller, but 30-ish. What makes them egalitarian? Well, what makes them egalitarian is that they have a basis of equality in the use of collective power, right? Because a big band is an orchestra. Exactly, Junk Collector. Thank you. Let me catch up. That was a surprisingly good Cartman impression. Lumpy, I know you've been around for a long time, but don't forget that I did a lot of theater before I got into history. Your local news station put out a report on bird flu and cats. Draw Curiosity is rating in. Are you not entertained? Draw Curiosity, welcome so much. And thank you so much for the raid. I need to... Let me see if I can find this really quick. Let me... How do I switch to this? Do I go... Here? Ah, yes. Okay. So, Draw Curiosity, the streamer that just rated in, made me an award. This is the the Curiosity Draw Award for streamer favoritism, and it's proudly awarded to me. How great is that? I felt so honored to have that award given to little old me. So Draw Curiosity is another member of the Knowledge Fellowship, and is a science streamer that talks about a lot of stuff. Apparently, I've only managed to catch one stream, and that was actually the Draw Awards that I got to catch. But anyway, welcome everybody from Draw Curiosity stream. Hello, my name is Shane. I am a college history and sociology and anthropology teacher, and we're actually starting a new stream series tonight, and we're talking about the history of government and politics. And we just had a conversation about power and capacity and whether or not our power should be limited. And then we moved a little bit into how we know about early anthropological era, early prehistoric concepts, and we got to this concept of egalitarian bands, and we're actually starting to discuss what those are. But let me catch up with chat real quick, because I can see a lot of messages coming in, and I want to make sure that I can say hello and address everybody. Every time you think that you haven't been surprised, you haven't read it, okay, cool. Draw Curiosity is here. Welcome in. Thank you so much again for the raid. I don't give out a lot of theater kid energy. That's okay. That's okay. It's buried deeply, but it's why I like talking so much in public. Teaching is not so different than theater. If I can present the information in a way that gets people on board and gets them hooked, then it becomes educational entertainment, not a lecture. So there's a lot of connection there. All right, so Tossie23, welcome in. Good to see you. Doug Sarb, welcome in. Mr. Ritos, welcome back. Good to see you. You know, a lot of theater kids. That's me. It's the Nepo Award for streamers you enjoy watching. Well, Draw Curiosity, thank you so much for the Nepo Award. Michael T. Mayer, welcome in. Good to see you. So blissed out. Hello and welcome in. I see lots of first-time chatters. Thank you so much for following the raid and then deciding to stick around. I know that a lot of people are probably tired and want to go off and do other things. I appreciate you hanging out. We'll get back to the information here in just a second. I just want to make sure that I say hey to everybody. Claire is here. Yog Crackthulu. I do like Crackthulu. That's an interesting one. Howdy to you as well. Theater kids are here to unite. Succubus is here. Welcome in. The favorite follower alert of all time. It's been used tonight already, Draw Curiosity. I don't know if we're going to get to see it again. Let's go Shakespeare or something. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear. I love me some Shakespeare. I do quite love me some Shakespeare. I was actually trying to organize a Shakespeare table read back at the beginning of the year, or the end of last year, and it just didn't kind of work. When you say whether or not our power should be limited, do you mean the government or the populace? Michael, that's a great question, and the answer is in both cases. We have to ask these things because we are discussing whether or not a person who is an individual that has power can use that power however they want? Do I have unlimited ability to affect other situations in my life? Should I have unlimited ability to use my power to affect other circumstances? And if we decide to form a government structure, what authority do we use to cede power to that government that then will use our power collectively to affect the members of the population? So this is a question that we had a fairly long discussion about, and we can totally go back through any of that if you have any more questions about it, or if you'd like me to follow back up, I'd be happy to. Today we're learning how we got into this odd situation of governments. Exactly. Going back to the pizza thing, it's not just a topping thing. It's even where we get the pizza from. Well, sure, absolutely, right? We have awakened the Kraken, indeed. This is an English teacher giving you a high five for the Shakespeare. Oh, well, I almost majored in English. I really, really like reading. I like writing. I don't talk about this a lot. I've been published quite a bit. Not quite a bit. Several poems, several short stories, and a novel. But I don't really talk too much about that stuff. I like reading and writing, and I like literature, and English has always been a big, big thing on me. I had a really great English teacher in high school that lit a fire under my butt. And man, it's just good stuff. This close to majoring in English. So the Founding Fathers were obsessed with the tyranny of the majority. They saw firsthand and even had close friends die during the French Revolution. For sure. Was anarchism ever a government form that translated into real politics? I'm asking if it ever happened to work out for a society. So pure anarchy, where there's no limits to any power at all, doesn't last long term. It is not conducive to social bonding. It doesn't really work because we have inequalities. This is something that we talked about, Succubus, before you popped in, and that's okay because I'm not trying to say like you didn't get here on time, but before we popped in, we talked about how each person has a certain amount of power, and these powers can line up in a lot of different areas, stuff like social power, economic power, emotional power, physical power, intellectual power, etc. And when we have so much different type of power, we're going to end up with inequalities, right? And with inequalities comes questions like, how do we treat inequalities? And do we put stock or value in these inequalities or not? And when we're talking about power inequalities, if we have no limits to the power or the usage of the power or the capacity to affect other people, those inequalities are going to get exacerbated very quickly. And as humans, we tend, as a species, let me just say that on this level, because I'm not trying to talk about you individually. I'm talking about like human beings as a species, Homo sapiens, right? Homo sapiens tend to not act for the collective good. They tend to act like the independent good. They want to do what's best for them in the moment. Now, that can have social benefits, but in many cases, it's not really. It's in many cases going to be used negatively, where that individual's power is going to affect other people. And because we tend to have this lizard brain amygdala response, fight versus flight, we're going to hoard, we're going to protect ourselves first, we're going to be greedy, we're going to act in ways that aren't sustainable, etc. So anarchy has been a way of things, but even ancient people in prehistory did not live in pure anarchy. And even individuals wandering around by themselves are suspect, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But what many of them missed was the tyranny of the minority, especially in terms of racism and slavery. This is true. Yes, Claire, indeed. You can see structural formation and power imbalances even in traditional / outside the communities like pirate groups and outlaw communities. Exactly, like gangs and mafia stuff. Right, they even, like if we look at some of the best organized what we might call criminal enterprises. These are things like the Japanese Yakuza, who have a political structure that in many cases works more efficiently than the Japanese government, like the actual legitimate, elected government. In many cases, the Yakuza, and this is going to sound crazy, but the Yakuza keep crime limits down in many cases in Japan better than the Japanese police offices do. So even what we might call outlaw communities very frequently do still build political and governmental structures. They're just not necessarily considered as legitimate as like elected officials or something like that. But yeah, we tend to form collective organizations where we are going to cede some of our power to the group. I would argue that social equality has hardly ever been the goal in human history. KP, that's a fair thing to point out as well. Pure social equality has not ever really been a common concept. Equality that suits me the best politically is probably the closest that we'll ever get. And in many ways, I don't know if that's what we might call a true equality. I think it's an allowed or a governed equality. I don't know how to. There's got to be a term for that, if you know what I mean. I just don't know what the exact word is. I don't think everyone acts for their own good all the time. This is true. Humans can 100% be altruistic. Absolutely. And Michael, I gave this reference earlier. If we were to allow 100 people unlimited use of their power, right? If we Cthulhu. Curiosity, I think you got to see the follower alert there, if that's if that's what you were looking at. So the point that I was trying to get at, if we gave 100 people the unfettered use of power, right? No limits, and 98 of them or 99 of them chose to use that power for the good. But one of them out of 100 decided to become a mass murdering psychopath and use that power to just kill as many people as they wanted to. Would that be an acceptable arrangement? Because we'd have 99 people being altruistic and being good, but then we have the one person going around murdering people. So then we have to get into this weird philosophical dilemma of how much good could the good people do to offset the bad that the bad people did. And that's a really sticky wicket, right? And it's tough to try to get that worked out. It's easy to be efficient when you can cherry pick with projects you want. Exactly. To be fair to anarchists, I think most of them would say that they aren't aiming for pure anarchy. They would just eliminate as many of the unjustifiable hierarchies as possible. That's fair too, but I don't think that I can trust everybody to make a fair judgment on what is a fair hierarchy and which one isn't a fair hierarchy. And that ends up being problematic as well, because then we have people making decisions that affect other people. Right? We end up with with another decision of who gets to use power and who doesn't. Yakuza are better at building roads. Yeah. You had no such English teacher in high school, but in college, you had one. He was a full-time professor and journalist. It graded really hard. Yeah, my English teacher graded really hard. Yes. What term are you trying to think of? I don't know. I was just trying to make up a term. Can confirm that there's areas of Italian businessmen in the crime rate is over. Yeah, there we go. 100 people chosen at random. What's up, Frank? Good to see you. Aloha. It's just a thought experiment, and we're not going to dig too far into it. I'm about caught up with chat. Melkor. I don't know what that was to, but kind of like Melkor. He's a jerk. Yeah. Predict this stream will be equal series education, social debate, and trauma counseling. Perhaps. Unfortunately, the one behaving badly happens when a psychopathic leader gains power. Yeah, sir, that's the thing, right? Like, anyway, I get what you're saying. All right, back to egalitarian bands. The concept here, very small group, right? We're talking about 30-ish people. One of the reasons that we're limiting our size of our first organization here is that our land only has a certain amount of carrying capacity. All right, this is an anthropological term. How much food can a certain area produce? And because we're talking about prehistory, we're talking here about pure hunter-gatherers, right? We're not talking about any basic level of agriculture. We're not even talking about tending stuff here. We're literally just talking about wandering around, collecting food, foraging, hunting, etc. So each area of land is only going to be able to carry a certain amount of people groups, a certain number of people, certain head count, whatever you want to call it. That area is going to be inhabited by one of our bands. And during particular times of the year, these bands, these small bands of people that might be 25, 30 people, might break into even smaller groups. And there are reasons for this. If it's more efficient for a band to break up during certain seasons to survive as a unit, they might break up, right? So, for example, during the winter, we all know that during winter time, we're not going to have as much capacity to get food. So we might break up into smaller groups and move a little bit further away so that we can access more land and therefore have more carrying capacity to survive. We might also break up our band a little bit if we are trying to have more kids. And this is an interesting sort of exchange group where maybe some members of our band that are the young childbearing age are going to go to another band that's on the other side of the mountain range, right? They're going to go over there for a little while and maybe form a pair bond, get pregnant, and then come back. Or maybe I'm going to go looking for a mate somewhere. Maybe I'm going to take my mate in our group and we're going to go over a little while so that we can form a pair bond and have a kid, and then we're going to come back and join the larger band. These bands are kind of not necessarily static groups. They're not 100% guaranteed to last. If a particular group of people decide that they're going to go to another band, that might break the whole band up, right? This is something that we think about today as being a very traumatic experience, right? Like, what if you took the 30 people that you're closest to and then decided, you know what, I'm only going to speak to half of them for the rest of my life, and I'm never going to see or speak to the other half of them forever. We, in the modern world, would probably get freaked out by that concept. I don't know, maybe you don't have a big band of people that are your closest groups, and you're just like, yeah, I could find 50 people to get rid of easy. But a lot of us would be really rough trying to pick the ones that we were going to stick with, right? But in the ancient world, this happened a lot because of stuff like changes in carrying capacity, environmental change. If there was a sickness, right? If an ailment got passed around and we broke up into smaller groups to try to minimize the impact of this ailment, and then we agreed to kind of come back together 2 or 3 months later, maybe not everybody shows up 2 or 3 months later, right? The world changes a lot more rapidly because they also don't have very basic concepts of stuff like how to handle big challenges, right? In our world today, when there's a hurricane or when there's a big forest fire or when there's an earthquake, we can rush aid from outside into those areas and help those people out. In the ancient world, if a hurricane hits and it knocks down all of your forest and it kills all of your plant life that you're going to eat, Or if a forest fire comes through and burns up your entire area and kills all the animals, you might die because you might very well run out of food because you don't have a surplus. So, when we're living in these little bands, we have to figure out how we're going to handle this stuff. Our resources are constantly going to be tested, and we are very unlikely to have a surplus. Little to no surplus possible here. And when it comes to that, the only way we can survive in many situations is to lean on the social connections. But when we do this, we're going to have to limit our power, right? And this gets to the politics and the government of it, right? How do we decide who to limit the power to? If we're going to be egalitarian, this is, again, the way that most of these early groups probably were, we're going to have to figure out how to handle this stuff. You're not going to really have enough of a surplus for somebody to specialize. Specialization is a process where one person or some people become basically tied to a certain role in the society, right? So this is, I am so-and-so the basket maker, or I am so-and-so the fisher, or I am so-and-so the farmer, right? In these egalitarian bands, you really don't see a lot of specialization because the surplus is so narrow that everybody probably has to be good at some stuff. You don't really get a lot of time to necessarily focus on one thing. Speed dating caveman style. Yes, indeed. That's speed dating caveman style. That would help with genetic diversity. It does. And while we can hypothesize that ancient people knew about the dangers of inbreeding, we don't know that for certain. And I'm going to say this, and let me be very careful here, right? Let me be very, very, very careful. Our modern society has put a lot of, I should say this, our modern Western society, especially in places like America, has put a lot of negative association with incest and inbreeding. I'm not trying to say that incest and inbreeding are good things. I'm not saying that they're positive things. What I am saying is that the impacts of inbreeding have been fairly dramatically overstated in our society because we have made incest and inbreeding such a big taboo, right? Rightly or wrongly, I'm not talking about that. I'm just trying to say that it is that way. In our culture in the West, inbreeding and incest is like one of the top big things you just don't do, right? And because of that, we have put a lot of negative connotation on that. And that has made it very easy for people to attach very real genetic issues to this, but it becomes overexpressed. The likelihood that you're going to have some major genetic disorder pop up after one generation of inbreeding is actually not very high, statistically speaking. Now, if you inbreed for 4 or 5 generations, that's where stuff gets really, really, really bad, because if every single one of your great-grandparents has this particular genetic trait, you're probably going to end up with the negative expression of that genetic trait, right? But even in cultures today, it's still very common to marry your cousin, right? If you go to Iraq or Iran or Kuwait or Syria today, you're going to find a lot of people married to their cousins, because in their world, the clan structure and the kinship structure is to be trusted more than the government structure or the political or social structure. And if I'm trying to make sure that my family keeps the business going, I'm going to marry my son to his first cousin because I'm related to her father too, and I know that they're less likely to screw over the family business than somebody from the outside. And cousin marriage is very, very common in the modern world, and people see way fewer genetic expressions of negative traits than you have probably ever led to be understood, right? And I'm not trying to say that everybody needs to go have incestual relationships with their family members. I'm not trying to say everybody should go have children through inbreeding. I'm not saying that. Don't hear me say that. What I'm just saying is it's not as prevalent as you have probably been led to believe. Much like Yoko Ono breaking up the band, for sure. If we briefly have a surplus, our band increases in size slightly to use it up. Exactly, Frank. We have expansion limits that are set by our capacity to increase. Lots of people named so-and-so back. Yeah, exactly, Raw. There are many people focusing on different tool sets. Vast majority of marriages in the past were between first. Yeah, exactly, right. I feel like the inbreeding backlash has a lot to do with the intentional inbreeding of royal families in European cultures. That could be part of it, Junk Collector. I don't know if we have any conclusive study of that where we've shown ancient people, or not ancient people, like people from the 1800s using this as a specific example as why to not be inbred. I can say that it makes gut sense, right? If I hate the royal families and they're all inbred, I might say that that's bad. But making sense with my gut is not the same as having the contemporary data or the primary sources from that time period to back it up. It makes gut sense, though, and that's kind of the first pass of making logical sense. Thanks to the Habsburgs, I'm not allowed to court my cousins. Pretty much, right? The fear of genetic issues due to incest is way overblown unless there's actual genetic disorder already in the family. Right, Patty. You might be in a familiar system where your paternal cousins would be considered family, but not your maternal cousins. And that's another thing, too, especially when we get to tribal structures, which are quite a bit larger than the band structure. The sides of your family that are considered family or sort of off limits are very frequently going to be based around matrilineal, patrilineal discussions, right? Like who's in charge of the group. And you do see matrilineal groups and patrilineal groups as patriarchal, matriarchal groups, right? Have the impression that anthropologists think that hunter-gatherers were specialized into hunter-gatherers. I'm not sure exactly what you mean with that, Michael. There was always going to be, like if we have a band of people and we've got 30 people, there's going to be a person in that group that is the best maker of baskets, right? They're just going to have the best baskets that anybody in the group makes. And if I need a basket, I might go ask Jimmy the basket maker to make me a basket. But the difference between being a specialized basket maker is that Jimmy also needs to go with us to hunt. And Jimmy also needs to go with us to forage for food. And Jimmy also needs to stand with us to fight against predators and collect firewood. Jimmy's job isn't just making baskets, right? So hunter-gatherer is a varied concept that has a lot of different jobs that are all wrapped up to it. It's not just I go hunt or I go gather things. It's I actively participate in the foraging for food and the production of the group as a whole, and everybody has to pitch in as much as they can to do as many tasks as possible because we don't have the ability to carry people in the group for extended periods of time that don't contribute to the group because we have limited resources. So I'm not trying to say that like every hunter-gatherer group was like super specialized in just hunting or just foraging, though we do start seeing early signs of gender differences during this period of time. And we can see that through genetic expressions. For example, biological females tend to have a better and wider range of color when it comes to color variation that they can see with their eyes. They have different cone densities or different ranges of color that they can see as opposed to biological males. And one of the leading answers to why this is that if you can tell when things are the good color ripe or the good color to be tasty instead of poisonous, that's going to be a beneficial trait that gets passed around on your X chromosome. And if you get double expression on your X chromosome, you're just going to be able to do it better. So biological females with X two X chromosomes are potentially just going to see better. Biological male reaction time, especially visual reaction time, is a little bit higher. And this could, one of the reasons that this is attached to a particular type of chemical production, protein production in the body. And this is going to be potentially, one of the explanations for this is that if I can react to motion faster, I'm going to be able to kill more things. So there is some genetic difference that we might have some early version of gender roles developing during this period of time, because it would need to be that far back, genetically speaking, for it to become basically permeated through the human genetic allele. That gets really sticky, and I know that a lot of people have used stuff like this to say really, really horrible negative things about people, biological sex stuff, and I'm not trying to get into any of that at all. I'm just trying to say that we do see some people doing certain jobs more than other groups, but as a hunter-gatherer society, we're all going to be expected to do a little bit of everything. Goodness. I once met a man who was talking about how he was reeling from being the fruit of inbreeding. He himself was struggling to finish college, and his brother was not doing very well at all. They had a small genetic ailments too, apparently. So now that situation is a little bit different, right? Your father is currently married to his fourth cousin. There you go, right? Shane is tiptoeing around the issues of eugenics. Yeah, so... I mean, obviously, that's... The anthropology as a historical science has been full of people that are just stupid and racist and classist and ethnocentric, and we should not follow their examples. Nazis are bad. Eugenicists are absolutely ridiculous. It's a pseudoscience that has no actual basis in reality, that was born out of classist, ethnocentric, racist ideology. I think that everybody here can tell that I'm not trying to be a jerk like that, right? Stupid standards and research ethics, exactly. What's up, PMAT? Good to see you. I don't think first cousins are sufficiently related to cause many genetic problems. You're drinking the second Singapore Sling. Interesting. So I don't feel like trying to type, like trying to work out the actual portion shared. Gotcha. That's fine. I feel you. Tech millionaires are trying to breed the super race, so stupid tech bros. Well, maybe so. Thought most of the stigma from inbreeding was because of the Habsburg. Cthulhu, there's definitely some of that, but I don't know exactly how far it is. I think the men were supposed to specialize in hunting while women were supposed to collect berries and plants and other food. We see some of that sometimes, but not every egalitarian band was broken down by some sort of specialized gender role. And that's getting a little bit more into sociological concepts of gender and sex, which we could totally talk about. Not necessarily the point here, but the idea here is that we don't have what we would call pure specialization, where one person does one thing and that's all that they do. The family name thing, exactly, right? You want to keep your family name going, right? Obviously, some specialized stone carvers in prehistoric Göbekli Tepe area. So I thought about talking about Göbekli Tepe, but I didn't tonight because that's probably a tribal structure and not an egalitarian band structure, timeline-wise, Tuna. But absolutely, we can talk about that next time around, and how that throws a wrench into a lot of our anthropological ideology. People tend to think of hunter-gatherer groups as super monolithic and tend to follow modern gender confirmations. Exactly. Right, it's very, very different back then, because we think of our concepts of the relationship between gender and sex today, and then we try to sort of transport that back in time, and it just doesn't work, because those people didn't think of the same things that we do. They didn't have the same culture that we do. They weren't socialized or normalized in the same social constructs that we are. So they have very different concepts about that than we do. When only rich, white, Nepo babies could afford to be anthropologists, you get what we got. Pretty much. Yeah. Hunter-gatherer groups could also change their food procurement based on the time of the year. Exactly. Right. Some did move really big. So you're going to be fishing in one part of the year and they're going to be hunting in another part of the year. Exactly. Right. They do travel a large area sometimes. You get hundreds of miles in the migratory range of some of these people groups. Yeah, and if you're hungry, you're going to go out and get food, right? If nobody's hunting anything, everybody's going to be out digging up roots, right? It's just the way that it rolls. Monolithic. So the concept of monolithic, it literally means one rock. And typically you might hear the word monolith for something like the big rocks that they make Stonehenge out of. But when we use it as an adjective to describe a group of people, what we're trying to say is that everybody in this group is exactly the same. So if I said, well, those history, anthropology, sociology teachers on Twitch are all stupid, I would be treating that group as a monolith, saying that all of them had the same quality. I thought it meant everybody rocks. And in that way, I guess I could say that I rock, but what's up, Casey? How dare I say that? Homogenous would be another way of saying it. Exactly. Casey Snow is here. Everybody go follow Casey. She's a really cool artist that streams just about every day now and is absolutely killing it on Twitch. You should totally go check out her stuff. So we have these bands. They're wandering around. How do we make decisions? If we are in an egalitarian band, how do we make our decisions? Usually, we fight. Lee Fight, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. Oh no, anytime, P-Bet. That's what I'm here for. So if we're talking about making decisions in our egalitarian bands, how do we do that? Well, we're going to make decisions usually among adults. Now, this is another one of those scenarios where our concept of adult is not the same as everybody's concept of adult historically. What concepts of adulthood we ascribe to people today are not the same concepts that they ascribed to people 100,000 years ago as concepts of adulthood. So the adults might be there. Now, it looks like in most of these egalitarian bands that biological sex did not really play into the decision-making process as an inequality. If you remember of the band and you were an adult, you probably got to make decisions regardless of biological sex. Now, does the majority rule? This is where we're going to get some politics, right? We're going to get some actual government here. If we have 30 people in our group and 20 of them are adults, and the 20 vote, and we have 11 this way and 9 the other way, does the 11 automatically win? Sometimes yes. Other times no. Because we recognize inequalities. And in certain circumstances, given the problem that we're trying to solve or the decision that we're going to make, certain members of the band might have a preferential voice in the discussion. If we're about to face a really tough winter and we need to find really good food, and there's an elder in our band that has been around for 30 years in bad winters, and they know where the food is, if that person says we need to go this way and 11 people disagree with that person, we might still go with that person. Consensus, though, is what we're talking about. And we brought this up earlier as a difference between majority rule and consensus. Consensus is a key for stability. You can't, as a band, you can't keep making decisions that are going to be completely lopsided based on inequalities. You're going to eventually have to form compromises, and you're going to have to come to group consensus decisions, because otherwise we're humans, right? We carry grudges. We get ticked off when we don't get our way. We get insulted when our advice isn't heeded. We are petty. We're dumb sometimes. We make decisions based on emotions instead of logic. And the only way for these bands to survive in the middle of nowhere doing things just to try to survive is to try to find consensus. So in some cases, yes, our majority is going to rule. But in certain cases, we're going to find some people whose age is a little bit more important, whose certain skills are a little bit more important, whose certain capacities or resources might be a little bit more important, right? So we have to try to figure out how to do some stuff. And if we recognize that the majority is making the wrong decision, we might just not obey the majority decision. We might break the band up. We might say, you all go do that. We're going to go do this thing. And that happens quite a bit. We see fissions in these groups quite a bit because, again, if our group can't find consensus and stay collectively headed in the right or in the same direction, we can just break up. Now, that might be bad for everybody, depending on the way that the group breaks, but that's the way that it is, right? There were others around as well. You'd be competing for other humans and animals in the area. Exactly, right? So this again gets to the question of how do we as a group use our power? Are we going to fight those people, right? Are we going to stand together and fight that other band? Maybe that's a point. Maybe that's something that we do. So maybe not. I don't know. Guys, I'm so-and-so the basket maker. Trust me. Yeah, exactly, right? I know where the good fish are. I'm the basket maker. Also, getting meat wasn't how we generally think of it as well. Sure. You gotta make ends meet. It's a bit of a pun there. Bad pun, but it was a pun. So if we make decisions, how do we enforce these decisions, right? Because this is the power structure again, right? If we make a decision, how do we enforce this decision? How do we make sure that our power is being used effectively? And as a group, we are justly using our power. So the biggest thing that we can do here is enforce our decisions. If the group says this and you don't agree, do you get punished? Right?
Spartacus!
Kyle is Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Welcome, Kyle.
Spartacus!
And thank you, as always, for being one of the OG Spartaci. You'll see that Kyle has the Founders First badge. One of the first 10 people to ever subscribe to me. And Kyle's a good dude. So, if we're going to enforce our decisions, what are some mechanisms that we can use? Well, in this small tribal, I keep saying tribal, in the small band group, social punishments are often the best punishments, right? If I can ridicule somebody into making a better decision, or if somebody is being a jerk, not like Cupcake Dreams. Cupcake Daydreams, that's even better. Cupcake Daydreams, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. If I can poke fun at somebody and get them to recognize that they were wrong, that's a social enforcement of a decision. If I can gossip about somebody behind their back and get them to recognize that they were wrong, that's a social mechanism for enforcing a decision. And let's not be wrong here. These social punishments can have really powerful impacts on ideology. Just look at how frequently modern politicians make fun of each other, right? You could probably think of half a dozen nicknames that are used for politicians that get, caught on in the meta narrative, and that's what everybody calls this person now, right? Because we know that social punishments can be real punishments, right? You taught middle school, you witness this every day. Exactly. The harshness of the fifth grade classroom, right? If you've got 30 fifth graders, they're using social enforcement for a lot of their decisions. And unfortunately, they don't understand how to use their power in the right way. And they also don't understand that the decisions that they're making aren't actually real decisions. In many cases in fifth grade, the media is telling you what to think and you're just going along with it because you're a fifth grade idiot. But that's social power that we're using to enforce our decisions. You can lose prestige, right? So let's say I make a really passionate argument that we really need to go to the West during this period instead of to the East. And I'm just making this super impassioned argument, and I convince the group when we go to the West, and then we don't find food, and Jimmy dies because of it, and Ricky gets eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. The next time we have a big argument, and I start passionately arguing for this, some people are going to give me the side eye. They're going to be like, I don't know, man. I like Jimmy. That Ricky guy can, kind of go get eaten, but like Jimmy was the basket maker, right? Now he's gone. So losing prestige is a social enforcement of decision making. If there are only 30 people in the group and you are trying to find a mate and you make a fool out of yourself by not following the group, you might not get a mate. Cripstick, thank you so much for that follow and welcome to the adventure. So you might lose appeal for potential mates. This is a punishment, right? But there could also be physical punishments. You could be denied resources. The tribe might, or I keep saying tribe, I apologize. The band might not let you eat as much. If you make a crappy decision and, you cost everybody food, you might not get as much as everybody else does. If you do something really bad, like you steal from somebody or you hurt somebody else, you might get jumped, right? Violent retribution is probably not preferred, but it happens. But let me tell you the worst punishment, right? The worst punishment is getting kicked out of the group. This was so scary. Being exiled or being banished, this was almost worse than a death sentence in many ways. Because you getting kicked out of the group means that you no longer have the group to fall back on. You no longer have a safety net. You no longer have any sort of support system that you can turn to in times of need. You did not want to get kicked out of the group. And the threat of being kicked out of the band is real and it is definite. And you know this in the back of your head. So this is a use of power. This is a political decision, right? Getting excommunicado, exactly. This is political. I am being denied access to the social organization by a decision and a consensus of group power. So the punishment is coming from the group. As a member of the group, we have all given authority to the other members of the group to participate in decision-making processes. That decision-making process has removed power from me to tap into my social resources, and it has used power against me to expel me from the group. This is all politics. Again, we're talking about prehistory in the 100,000 year ago range, but it's still politics. We're still using power. We're still deciding how we use that power. We're still ceding authority to a group that is going to have certain levels of ability to poke that back at us if we need, right? You had 120 seventh graders. Oh my goodness. I taught seventh graders for 6 years. Bless you, tardigrade, for surviving. I only had one class, so I did not have 120. I usually only had about 15 of them at a given time. I was at a small school, so they only had one homeroom for each grade. But I remember distinctly seventh grades. The last year that I taught seventh grade, those students were among the worst academic students that I've ever taught in my life. They were the first group that was completely under No Child Left Behind from kindergarten through seventh grade. So they got No Child Left Behind curriculum from kindergarten all the way through. And it was noticeable. The hottest basket maker in the land just got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. You know, if you're getting your basket maker eaten, this is not good for you. The punishment of Cain, right? Jimmy got canceled, right? You don't do work in the Continental, John. Exactly. You don't work on the grounds, right? This is a political decision. They have organization and hierarchies. Because they participate in the structure, they have ceded some of their power to the authority of the group. This is the mechanism and the function of government, right? 15 is still too many. Seventh graders are mean. They can be. You taught middle school until 2022 through COVID. Whoo! You weren't allowed to let anybody fail, even if they did zero work. Yep. I was teaching college when COVID hit, and the grades suffered significantly. Yep. All right. So who makes up this band? If we're in the band, who's in the band with us? Usually smaller kinship groups. And this is going to be people that you're probably first or second or third cousins with. We do see bands exchange membership. Again, we do have a lot more fluid makeup of these bands than we might think. You see people come and people go. We might exchange members if we run into another band of people. We might go, hey, you've got some people that are this age. We've got some people that are this age, and they might have some kids together. Do you want to send a couple this way? We'll send a couple that way. Yeah, sure. Right. So that happens. Sometimes it's males leaving for a new group. Sometimes it's biological females leaving for another group. We really don't know. This gets more evident later on when we get to tribal culture, but that's a different group. That's why we're talking about bands tonight. So like Fleetwood Mac during the Rumors period. Kinda. I know the basket maker got eaten, but he still wanted to get the band back together, for sure. All of this is the basis of Fallout. Cripstick, you're not wrong, because after the bombs drop, right, and America has to literally crawl out of the vaults to make a new civilization, we resort back to these bands. There aren't many groups in Fallout that would qualify as egalitarian bands. Most of them would be tribal or clan structure. Obviously, the cities would be city level, but that's actually really fascinating. I've never until just this moment considered looking at Fallout as a sort of, I guess, template or structure for anthropology. That's a fascinating concept. I'm probably gonna think about that a lot more than you think that I am. But also, Cripstick, welcome again to the conversation. I don't want to set the world on fire, exactly. I'm only the third best basket maker in this band, but if I go to that band, would I be number one? Maybe so. Oh, yeah, the social punishments and not wanting to get exiled. Exactly, Cripstick. That's exactly right? That level of social punishment for the Vault Dwellers especially. Absolutely. Fallout Factions makes up the bands and the tribes. Yeah. So, like, I think New Vegas was probably the best one of this, where you had all the different factions that you could sort of fall in with, and they all had their own little sets of rules, and they all had different social paradigms, and they were all okay with this stuff, but not okay. The whole little thing of everybody liked that. You know, the reason that's kind of a meme is that we fall back on this, that certain situations are ones that just everybody thinks are good, right? You know, crawl through the Fallout. Quite a good class size. Yeah, so my class sizes are usually 35 to 40 students in college now. All right, Cave, what's going on? How you going? All right. So usually small kinship groups. Your culture, and when I say culture here, I mean like the way that we live our life. So our physical culture, our non-material culture, might be similar to other bands that are in the area. What's up, Polychaser and Lopta? Welcome in. I thought we were an autonomous collective. Eris Raid, kind of. What's up, Rexler? Good to see you. And David, welcome in. You're fooling yourself. We live in a dictatorship. I may or may not have an entire stream planned around the socially aware peasant from Monty Python. And we may or may not be planning on taking that speech line by line and explaining how it was an actual attempt at making government and politics work. We take it in turns. Yeah, anarcho-syndicalist communes. Those did exist. Those did exist. All right, Tardigrade, thank you so much for dropping by and for participating in the chat. Much appreciated. I hope you have a good one. And maybe we'll see you around next time. All right. Part of the politics of some of these bands were to pretend they were more democratic in structure than they actually were. Okay, so Cripstick, we're talking about stuff that's way, 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 way back in history. This is before democracy was even named democracy. So we're talking about like hunter-gatherer groups of 30 people wandering around in the wilderness. Right. So I was talking about culture here. If we find a sort of a larger group of bands, like, so we zoom out to maybe an area the size of a state or a smaller country, there might be, 60 or 70 bands of these people kind of wandering around in the same area. The idea here is that they might have some shared culture. They might be making tools the same way. They might be eating roughly the same types of diets. They might have the same level of technology or the same type of technology. They might speak the same language. They might have some of the same religious ideology. Religion gets a little squirrely back this far trying to understand what it all is, which is why we're trying to kind of stay away from that for the moment. We're going to obviously talk about the overlap between religion and politics in the future of this particular series. But you're going to probably see some levels of cultural overlap where my band might be doing the same things as your other band. So if I'm really good at doing this here and I go to another band because maybe we're exchanging members that are going to form pair bonds and we just happen to be sending biological males to this other group, right? I might go to this other group and they go, hey, what are you kind of good at? And I go, well, I'm really good at making arrowheads. I'm decent at making baskets. I'm not as good as Jimmy. I've got okay fishing net skill, kind of decent at making food, and they're going to find a way for me to fit in because they're probably going to be living in roughly the same way that my old band was. Exactly, like trading partners like the Fallout series. Like if you've seen the Amazon TV show where we're going to send our members to this vault and they're going to send their members to our vault. Yeah, that's something that legit happened. Do they have trading cards with their scores on them? They don't have stat sheets that come with them, Lopta. That'd be really easy if they could, but it's not uncommon for modern observance of these group exchanges for the sort of the older members of this band to sit down with the older members of this band and go, okay, well, we're going to send you Lopta. And here's what Lopta's really good at. Here's the problems we've had with Lopta in the past. Here's where Lopta excels. And we think that Lopta would probably be okay in these kind of roles. Is that okay with you all taking Lopta? And they're going to be like, that sounds amazing. This person sounds like they're going to be a great addition to our band. So you're probably going to have some level of communication where people that are potentially maybe related distantly or have contact through older tribes. Maybe, 20 years ago, if I was in this other tribe, I go, hey, remember when I was in your tribe? And they're like, yeah. and I go, let me tell you about this person. And because we have that old bond, we might have this level of trust that we built up because, you remember how I was and I remember how you were, so we can make that connection historically, right? But it's not just like a draft, right? We're not just going to go, that person looks like they have good genetics. I'm sure there was some of that, right? You're mostly just laughing now at how relevant Fallout is for examples of this stuff. Yeah, KP, I know I just joked about like how that's living in my head. I'm going to be thinking about that a lot. If Jimmy gets traded, then we might need an arrowhead maker and a fisherman because Jimmy was just really good at making baskets. Exactly. No, you didn't break me. It's just really, really good. I like it a lot. There's no replacing Jimmy. Our baskets just suck now. Maybe so. But, maybe we're moving into an area where we don't need baskets as much, and we're just not going to... we'll miss Jimmy for his great puns around the campfire, but we're not necessarily going to need his baskets as much. Maybe Jimmy was an amazing basket maker, but it was really crap at fishing. And we're going to move our band permanently to the coastline, and we're going to be better off with trading him for the best fisher in that other group, right? Right. We'll trust but verify, right? We're not going to just take everybody's word for it. My name is Steve, and I make something called pottery. Oh wow, you're super advanced in technology then, Steve. This band sounds a lot like Menudo. The actual members of the band can be switched to meet the current needs. Exactly, right? Maybe Jimmy was holding us back the whole time. Have you ever seen a house without a Tupperware cabinet? Baskets will always be needed. This is true. We need 3 meals a day. We don't need 3 baskets a day. That's fair. We could just scam people, right? I'm sure that there's some scamming going on. Anyway, people that are individuals, and I said that I would talk about this, and I want to get this pretty quickly here. People that are individuals are immediately mistrusted, right? So if a random person, so let's say we're a band, so everybody in here, how many people do we have in here? We've got 41 people, so we've got a big band, and we're going to be expressing a lot of trust to hang out with all of the people here. But that's okay because we love everybody, and we're going to have a big band, and we're going to make it work. But we're hanging around the campfire one night, right? And a single person comes walking up, and we don't know who this person is. None of us have any connection with this person. Just a single person walking up middle of the night, and they say, "Hi, I'm Jimmy. I make baskets. Can I join your band?" Do we let him in the band? Right? Do we let him in the band? Or are we immediately skeptical? Right? Why are we skeptical? Well, where's his band? Right? Why is this person by himself? Is this person sick? Right? Is this person a security risk? Right? Is this person somebody that has been kicked out of another group? Right? Have they been outcast? Exactly. Are they in exile? Did they get kicked out of their other group because they're a social risk? We don't immediately trust this guy. Individuals by themselves are big question marks. You don't know whether or not you can trust them. You don't know why they're by themselves. You just don't know, right? You just don't know. Your name is Jacob and you make nuclear reactors. Okay, cool. We can make those work in the Fallout wasteland. Maybe not in the prehistoric wasteland. If you don't want to get traded, best hide your light under one of those baskets. Exactly, Lopta. It'd be better if it was a bushel basket, though, right? You don't need to follow anyone. You're all individuals. I'm not. Exactly. Just loving the Monty Python references tonight. You don't trust the lone man. He's liable to be a time traveler. Well, even if we don't have the concept of time travel, he might be, but we don't know. All right, so what do we not see in egalitarian bands? We've already talked about specialization. You are probably not going to find true specialization in an egalitarian band. You're also not going to find a heavily stratified society. You are not going to find a class structure where you have upper class, middle class, lower class. You're not going to find slavery in an egalitarian band structure. You're not going to find luxury items conserved purely for the elites, because you're not going to have elites. If you have luxury items, they might be something that anybody just has, right? You're not going to find literacy. We don't have a single piece of evidence that egalitarian bands ever had any system of organized alphabetic, linguistic, pictographic language that they wrote down. We can get into a really big anthropological discussion about whether or not cave paintings are going to be considered communication. I think that you can convey an idea, but it's way different than written language. And I don't think that understanding that this is a mammoth and that I'm hunting the mammoth is equal to writing down the word mammoth and people understanding that these symbols mean this word, right? Very different situation. You're not going to find large public works. You're not going to find big fields that have been cleared for agriculture because there is no agriculture. You're not going to find big buildings because there aren't buildings. Well, I mean, there might be temporary dwelling places, but you're not going to find something like a temple, right? You're also not going to find bureaucracy. You're not going to find these people whose job it is basically to keep the government structure running. Because they just don't have the time to worry about that stuff, right? Get him to show how he makes baskets? Yeah, maybe so. You could say, hey, make me some baskets, and you could see that he makes really good baskets. But do we trust that he left his other group on good terms? Maybe he got kicked out of his... He could make the world's best baskets. But what if he murdered one of the other band members and was exiled? We got to be skeptical about this guy. Can you poke him with a stick? I don't know if you want to poke the new guy with the stick because he might poke you back while you're asleep. Egalitarian, but some always end up more equal than others, like an Animal Farm. Well, we're definitely moving towards hierarchies. We don't see hierarchies as evidently or even at all in these egalitarian bands because surplus is what really pushes a lot of these hierarchies. When everybody's trying to survive, it doesn't necessarily matter if you're a little bit smarter than somebody else or a little bit stronger than somebody else, because nobody is strong enough and smart enough to survive on their own. Everybody needs people to survive. Even the smartest and strongest person can break their leg and die in the forest, right? So that's just the way that it goes. He got kicked out because he wouldn't shut up about the baskets. How do we know these things about these egalitarian bands without written stuff? Rexler, that's a great question. We answered that at the top of the string, but I can reiterate briefly. We can look at evidence from existing egalitarian bands and how they do stuff. We can look at historical records of egalitarian bands and how they were observed doing things. And we can compare this on a certain way to existing archaeological pieces of evidence. But the biggest and most obvious example that we can go to is just we know that humans would not have survived if they were all living completely by themselves, right? It just wouldn't have worked. Hide the body in a basket, nobody's going to suspect it, right? As long as there are judgment makers, there is self-serving that will produce bureaucracy. So sure, but if the band is 30 people and we carry on this process for, let's say, 2 or 3 years, and we notice that Jimmy is constantly making self-serving decisions that are promoting his ideas but not as good as necessary for the entire group, we can kick Jimmy out of the group, right? And then he can go, make a basket in the woods by himself, because in the band structure we have a much more direct result on the politics, because we are all directly involved in the politics if we are sort of participatory age or adult level, right? You cannot achieve equality without at least expressing or at least suppressing some. Interesting. Is that not flawed logic? Well, Polychaser, this is what we talked about at the top of the stream. We had a discussion that was about 30, 45 minutes long about power and how power gets used and whether or not everybody should have unlimited access to power. So if we let everybody have unlimited access to power, you're not going to end up with a society. You're just going to never die. Michael. Michael, thank you so much for that follow. And good night, my friend. Hope that you have lots of sleep. Can't find any egalitarian bands on Spotify. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be horrifying to get kicked out of your group. Exactly. It'll be a disaster trying to find consensus with 100 people having a degree. Well, it's not going to happen completely, but this is why we fall back on consensus instead. Consensus instead of pure majority rule. But this is also why we see bands breaking up and coming together much more frequently than we would see countries or political organizations changing today. In our world, we've lived under roughly the same political structure for our entire life. In the ancient world, you could be in 15 different bands over the course of your life, and they all do things a little bit differently. Because if a half of the group didn't work with the other half of the group, they'd literally just split and they'd go two different ways. Like they had that as a mechanism to fall back on. Just forget off. Right. Dang it, Otzi, how many times? Right. Are we not bound to our mostly shared moral framework when it comes down to it, which is very dynamic and has developed along the way? In today's world, sure. But in the ancient world, not so much. Morality was much more a decision of the people right around you than it was some sort of overarching institutional thing. Because there weren't what we would call big institutions at that time. Social institutions were as big as your tribe. And if you didn't like your tribe, you could go find another tribe. I'm sorry, band. I keep saying tribe. Band. Ugh. Yeah, so if you don't like it, you can just go, right? And if my morals don't match your morals, we could go find another band that has better morals or more approachable morals or more consensus morals that are going to follow our consensus. So we just move around a lot more. Is that still not what makes communities tick? Shared norms and values? Absolutely. But the difference is we move less than those people did. Right? Even if you were a military kid and you moved every 3 years and you're 30, so you've moved 10 times in your life, these people may have been in 10 different places over the course of 10 different months. Right? We can't necessarily make a one-to-one comparison between our modern concept of morals and norms and values and ethics with people 100,000 years ago, morals and values and norms and ethics. A lot of the same things counted, right? Like stealing and murder and stuff like that. It's probably considered bad everywhere you go. But, stuff that we would consider wrong today, they might consider right. And stuff that they considered right then, we might consider wrong. Well, I wasn't trying to say that all values are equal. I'm actually trying to say that they're not equal. You don't move shrinkingly, but you certainly move further. There we go, right? All right, so that is kind of all I wanted to say about that. And just generally speaking, this is kind of the stuff that we'll be talking about through this process. The next time we do History of Government and Politics, we'll be talking about tribes and chiefdoms, and we'll move a little bit bigger into the groups. And when we add more people to the mix, this is going to affect the way that we handle these questions in a different way. We're still going to be answering the same questions, but with different levels of complexity, right? So lots of that. People salad. Well, I mean, that's kind of society, right? People salad. Let's say that we couldn't live without Jimmy's baskets, and maybe we lean on Jimmy's opinions more. Cripstick, we mentioned that with inequalities in certain situations and decision making processes, some people's opinions might be more valued than others, but that's going to be on a circumstance by circumstance basis. Kyle, I don't know how many. I don't know how many this is going to have. It's going to go until I feel like I've said everything that I need to say. Right. Tuna wants to know what's in the news that's not terrorist related. That's unfortunately a lot of the stuff in the last couple of days. What's in the news? That's not terrorist related. There is a really unfortunate but politically interesting scenario going down right now in the country of Moldova. Let me turn on the borders. All right, so this is Moldova. I wonder if they're going to pop up the red line. They're not going to pop up the red line. Okay, so in Moldova, there is a separatist region that was attempting to separate from Moldova because of differences of political opinion. And as of yesterday, Ukraine has cut off all Russian natural gas shipments through the country of Ukraine. And this particular region of Moldova was getting natural gas from that pipeline. And there are a lot of people in Moldova that are in the separatist region that are accusing the Moldovan government of colluding with the Ukrainian government to get them to cut off that gas flow to this area in order to hit these people during the worst time of the year, because obviously it's very cold, and one of the things that they did to heat their homes in this area was burn natural gas. So that's an interesting little scenario that's playing out right now. Moldova has had a fairly tough go of things politically in the last couple of years. They had an election last year that just barely put a pro-European in the driver's seat as opposed to a pro-Russian candidate. There was obvious evidence of Russian election meddling to try to get their preferred candidate in power in Moldova, and unfortunately they are being hurt by a lot of the same issues that are currently affecting Ukraine. Now obviously they're not being directly invaded by Russia, but a lot of the political wrangling, a lot of the natural resource wrangling kind of stuff is affecting Moldova in similar ways that it's affecting Ukraine. So I don't think we talk about Moldova a lot. So when people do what's in the news, I usually try to pick stuff that isn't necessarily big headline news. Yeah, Moldova's in for a cold winter without Russian gas. Exactly. I guess I'm saying, how can we judge the Maya for killing their virgins from our modern standards? In their time, they truly thought that what they did was acting morally. So they thought it was moral to do so, yes. We obviously would say no. And the question there is, because we say no, does that mean they have to say no? And this is a philosophical discussion that ultimately boils back to, is there objective morality? Is there something that exists as a paradigm for right and wrong outside of humankind? Different people say different things. The big Eskimo plan is gaining traction, and soon the world of ice and cold will be ours. Okay, so the Eskimos are taking. Cupcake Daydreams, thank you so much for the follow, and have a good one. I appreciate you stopping by, and hope to see you next time. So there's that. Anybody else have any questions or anything like that? Otherwise, we are about to do a raid and bring our eyeballs to some other deserving Twitch streamer. Do I think Jimmy will be okay? Jimmy will probably be okay. Typically speaking, Jimmy is my go-to for a person who does something that may or may not be well thought out, but has some level of positive influence. For example, Jimmy was the first person that decided that you could chase a mammoth to the point that the mammoth would die. Eat the animal. Thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. Jimmy was the first person that's like, "Hey, that berry looks tasty. I wonder if I could eat that," and eats it. And then even if Jimmy dies, the society at large is bettered for it because the rest of the band knows those are poison berries. We shouldn't eat those. So Jimmy is the daredevil that does things and has some level of positive social benefit, even if it involves him dying horribly. But we need societal Jimmys in a certain way. I'm not trying to say that we need people to do stupid things and die. But we need some people that are willing to take risks, even when the rest of the world says that's a dumb idea, because we actually innovate that way. If you're looking at a social deviance scale, Jimmy is the innovator. He is the one that comes up with the new ideas, even sometimes dumb, bad, new ideas, but still innovation. We have this whole concept, and if I copied and pasted the conversations that we've had in mod chat about Jimmy and this other guy named Ricky and all of these different people, we have like alpha Jimmys and we have sigma Jimmys, and it's so convoluted and stupid. It works really well as a model for thought. I've considered writing a paper about it, but it was dumb. Anyway, Rexler's going to go back and catch it. So yeah, Rexler, you asked earlier. I'm going to be highlighting this, and I'm going to be exporting that to YouTube. So if you all don't know, I do have a YouTube channel, and I am exporting my VODs slowly from Twitch to YouTube. But I'm going to be moving this series, the History of Government and Politics, over as soon as possible. So like I'm going to try to highlight this and get this actually moved over even tonight, maybe tomorrow though. Yeah. We had several raids and lots of good questions. I know. This is also why I planned for less material, because I anticipated a lot of conversation. Should have stuffed it in a basket, right? Just put it in a basket. All right. Who be streaming? Let's go raid Professor Ashley.
I'm Spartacus!
We haven't raided Professor Ashley in a while.
I'm Spartacus!
Oh, Polyjacer, thank you so much for the gift sub.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm an interesting person. I appreciate that. I've been called much worse. All right. So we're going to go raid Professor Ashley, who is also a sociologist, is currently playing games and teaches about video game design and level design and stuff like that, but is also a sociologist and would probably have a lot of interesting things to add to the conversation here. So we're going to go raid. Our raid cry is just adventure. Usually we put adventure in all capital letters. If you have any of our really cool emotes on stream here, you can throw that stuff in like so. And yeah, might be back around this weekend to build some model kit stuff and just chat more. But until next time, everybody, thanks so much for participating. Let me make sure that I say thanks to everybody. Thanks to all of our new followers, all of the new subscribers, all the people that resubscribed. Let me also thank everybody that's supporting me over on Patreon and people that have sent me book donations. You all are great. Thank you so much.